Hey friends, the APAlmanac is hosting its third Architectural Photography Awards. I'm very excited to be submitting again, and I thought it'd be interesting to reflect back on my success from last year, where my work was recognized as a finalist in 3 different categories. I was an editor's choice for Project of the Year. I was the only photographer from the United States that was shortlisted as an Early Career and Emerging Talent finalist. And finally, I received the honorable mention for the Photo of the Year award. I think this image has a really interesting backstory, and I want to share that with you guys. It took pretty extensive planning, scouting, preparation, and execution, so I thought it'd be a lot of fun to give you a peek behind the curtain and really dive into the behind the scenes of how I made this photo. But first, I want to send a huge shout out to the APAlmanac, Mike Kelly, Lexi, the judges who had an incredibly difficult job to pick the best work out of this incredibly talented community. There's so many amazing photographers in this industry that I look up to, so it's such an honor to be considered alongside them. Let's dive into this and start talking about this photo, why it was chosen, and how it was made. So personally, I think it's pretty easy to see why this image might catch a judge's eye. It's got the components of a great image: the lighting, the composition, the subject matter, and the storyline. It's an epic moment of golden light. The sun is shining down this hallway in between this perfectly symmetrical structure. You've got a surfer risking his life to ride down the center of these concrete pillars. So there's this harmony between architecture and nature. This is actually a well-known event called Scrippshenge. Twice a year, the sunset perfectly aligns with Scripps Pier. It creates this beautiful light at the end of the tunnel effect for just a few brief minutes. I've always wanted to do it, but I resisted because of how popular it is. But finally last year, I decided to go for it. And I had a few visions in mind that I thought would be different than what's already been done. One of my ideas was a long telephoto lens time-lapse shot. That video happened to go insanely viral on social media. My second idea was a slightly wider shot with a surfer riding down the middle of the tunnel. As a photographer, there's only so much you can control. It didn't really play out the way I was hoping, but using modern technology, we now have the power to craft a scene exactly the way you envisioned it in your head. That's what I did in this case. Let's walk through the whole process, starting with the shoot. The location I'm shooting at is called Scripps Pier in San Diego, California, right next to UCSD. This is a really unique pier compared to most others because the underside of it is very clean and minimal. There's no visual clutter. There's just this perfect repeating pattern. In architectural photography, one of the most powerful composition tools you can use is shooting from a one-point perspective. There's one single vanishing point. All of your leading lines are pointing towards the center. That's exactly where I want the viewer to look. Now, in general, I'm a huge sucker for symmetry. It's one of my favorite ways to present architecture if the option is available. I think a really well-balanced composition can be such a powerful visual tool to draw the viewer's attention to where you want it to go. As much as I tried, my second camera was not perfectly centered, which caused an asymmetry with the pillars. But as you'll see later, I was able to correct that in post to make it appear as though it was perfectly centered. All right, so I got up on this concrete block. We won't talk about how awkward it was to sit on this wet slope. I've got my primary heavy-duty Manfrotto tripod with a geared head, and then I have a super clamp arm attached to one of the tripod legs for my secondary B camera. My primary camera was a Canon R5 with a Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter lens, and my second camera was a Canon 5DSR with a 70 to 200 lens. My strategy is to choose the best possible settings and then use an intervalometer to have it continuously shoot a time lapse. What's cool about shooting a time lapse is you're building this library of assets. So when you go to craft a photo later on, you have hundreds of frames, find interesting moments, and collage them together into a compelling composition. This is where you can get really creative depending on what you're looking for. This approach works for a lot of different techniques. Let's jump into the computer and talk about post-production. So I'll get home from the shoot and import everything into a new Lightroom catalog. The first view of it is always a little disappointing. And that, folks, is why we shoot RAW. The first thing I'm gonna do is put a very basic Lightroom edit and apply that to all of them. For starters, I'll lower the highlights, raise the shadows, and pop in a little contrast. The shadows are pretty noisy, so we're gonna add some noise reduction. Increase the sharpening to compensate for that, and a little bit of color noise reduction as well. We definitely don't want chromatic aberration. I wanna enable profile corrections. We need to use transform tools to fix the perspective. It's so important to have that horizon level, and when capturing architecture, your vertical lines need to be truly vertical. The next step is basically to gather the puzzle pieces. I'm gonna go through these photos frame by frame and just look for anything that catches my eye. Here's a perfect example of an interesting wave crash. You start to see this really interesting glow on the water. I'm gonna mark those layers for the foreground. So I'm gonna go in and make some individual adjustments to different photos. Okay, now we're ready to bring these layers into Photoshop. Here's where I switch over to my stylus. Now that we've chosen a base layer, I'm gonna cycle through the rest of the photos, toggle the eyeball on and off, and see if there's any part of them that I want to use. So here's a really cool splash. I'm gonna see how I can integrate this. Because it's a different point in the sunset, the lighting is slightly different, so we can isolate the glowing wave there. I can start to add more reflections in the middle channel here. So just like that, we only have 2 layers so far, and you can already tell I'm starting to extract the most out of this scene and make it as cool and dramatic as possible. We can keep using that same strategy with other layers too. Hey friends, real quick, while working on this video, it occurred to me that there is way too much detail to cover in one short YouTube video. In addition, I recorded an hour-long breakdown walking you through every single step of my workflow, my thought process, all the juicy Photoshop tricks and tips that I use that I'm finally sharing with you guys. The link to that video is down in the description. It does have a small price tag. That's the only way I can justify making this type of content. And really, it's meant for anybody who is ready to seriously level up their photography and Photoshop game. So if that's you, check it out down below, and thank you for supporting. All right, let's get back to the breakdown. The next step that I know I want to tackle is this opening doorway. We're gonna draw a mask, paint in that area. So as you can see, we have repositioned the sun to be a little bit more in view. No way. Is that a dolphin? Oh, it's a bird. So next, I want to pick a layer for the sky. My goal here is to make that sky a little bit darker. It makes the colors more rich. It draws attention inwards towards the sun. If you look before I added these effects, the entire frame feels very bright. A cool technique to composite birds in is also by using blending modes. This is a really powerful technique to avoid masking the actual bird. Now I'm going to go through and continue doing that with all the birds. I played around with a few different foregrounds and ended up blending a few together that I liked. The next big thing we have to do is retouching. As you can see, there's people that shouldn't be there, distracting clutter. Essentially get rid of anything I don't want in the frame. So here's where I zoom in extra tight at 300 or 400% to really see what I'm doing and make sure everything is pixel perfect. Next, I want to tackle this signage. I think it's a huge distraction. I want all the forms to feel very clean and minimalistic. This job calls a little more for the stamp tool and more finesse in retouching. To me, retouching is such a powerful and effective way of cleaning up an image. You wouldn't think that it makes a huge difference until you step back and see everything that you changed, and in culmination allows the viewer to concentrate on what's important and not get distracted. I think there's only one more step to retouch. Pretty much everything is unsymmetrical. That's a problem which needs to be fixed. What I'm going to do now is work a lot of Photoshop magic to stretch things out and make it perfectly symmetrical. Kind of a pain in the butt, but it's got to happen. Unfortunately, there's one more issue I'm noticing. Those posts are not straight either. It's slanted a little bit outwards at the top. So that's another thing that I have to fix. Now we have to do the same thing on the left side. So now all of our guides should match. The gaps are the same and the pillars are the same. And that, folks, is how you break your brain trying to make everything perfectly straight. Welcome to an architectural photographer's nightmare. But hey, we made it happen. We got there. There's one more final adjustment I want to make, and that is to the water. To me, currently, the highlights on the water are a bit too bright. Awesome. We are reducing the brightness of those highlights, but it is affecting areas that I don't want it to. So now I will gently start painting in that curves adjustment where I want it to be applied. Okay. We need the surfer. But for a couple reasons, I wanted to choose the other one. Bear with me while I draw a tedious mask around this figure. There's a couple more things we need to do to this surfer to make it blend a little more naturally and match this sunset scene a little more accurately. I did in fact forget to mention a few final touches. I searched back through the original photos I took with my other camera. I picked a higher resolution shot to bring into my composite. I scaled it down to fit properly, then carefully blended it in with masking and adjustments in order to increase the clarity of the sun, which after all is the focal point of this image. I took it the extra mile to do some edge patrol, fixing chromatic aberration and some last minute cleanup. Finally, we're back in Lightroom, which is where I prefer to end the process with a perfect crop, last minute color corrections, and adding in a small custom vignette to top it off. Then it's a high quality export and send it off to print. Hopefully you guys found that valuable for me to walk through my entire process, exactly what goes into crafting an image like this. It's really easy to see a picture and then think, wow, they got really lucky. That was a perfect moment that they chose to snap their finger. More often than not, when you see commercial photography, fine art photography, it is highly curated. Every little detail is considered. That's certainly true with me and my work. And to me, that's the true beauty of digital photography. We are not limited to pressing the shutter one time. I think the most exciting aspect of photography is the ability to craft every image to look exactly the way you envisioned it or the way that you want to portray it to your viewers. Here's one example of that. I'm sure there's going to be many more breakdowns just like it. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you, APAlmanac. Very grateful for these awards. I've got to get shooting. I got to shoot some more architecture so that I can submit again. So hopefully we'll be doing this again next year. Thanks a lot, friends. Peace. I love you. Bye-bye. Like and subscribe for more cat outros. Are you not going to be my hype man?